All right, dear people. It is your friendly and favorite neighborhood apologist, Damon Richardson, for another edition of Urban Logia Live. And we are going to be having an incredible conversation tonight. We'll be talking about discussing the question of whether David raped Bathsheba. And so just hang tight with me here. I am looking for my boom.
The foundation of what you're building on is heresy. Then it's a false house.
All right. It's been such a minute since I have been on that I forgot where all of my controls were. But listen, tonight, this is going to be a great conversation. Make sure you let others know that we are here, that this conversation is going on. If you could all do me a favor, share on your social media, hit somebody up in the inbox, just share the video link or however you do it. Text them the link, but let them know this is where the conversation is. The other thing is, if you have not already subscribed to Urban Logia's channel, and if you have not hit that notification bell, take a minute to do that because, of course, I'm always trying to get above 10,000 subscribers, trying to push that number. The more people subscribe, the further our information gets out there, right? So that's helpful to a lot of people who really need to be able to have a place to go where they can hear not only sound teaching, but get solid apologetics and just hear conversation that that helps them to be able to think through difficult issues as a Christian, right? So we do a little bit of all of that over here. But tonight, and thank all of you for joining. Let me see. So many of you are already on. Make sure you take a second to drop in the chat where you are watching from. Of course, rep your city, whether that's New York or whether it's Philly or whether it's Columbus, Georgia, Columbus, Ohio, Richmond, Virginia, wherever you're from, go ahead and rep your city. But tonight I have a very special guest who will be joining us in this conversation. This is a good brother and friend of mine. He pastors a church in Chicago. I'm going to let him kind of tell you a little bit more about himself, but many of you already know who he is, so he's not a stranger to some. But he's a good, dear brother and friend of mine. Is Reverend Dr. Tyron Laws. He is going to be joining us for this conversation. Now, this is a very scholarly brother, and this is one of the reasons why he is on here tonight to have this conversation. It is not a debate, although some aspects of debate might be present in a conversation because we kind of take two different views on it. It is not a formal debate, right? This is a conversation, a theological, scholarly conversation between two persons who are brothers in Christ and mutual and respectful theologians, right? So this is my dear brother. I'm going to bring him on, and he can tell you anything else about his ministry, where his church is, and all that good stuff. Welcome to Urban Logia's platform, Dr. Tyron Laws. You've been on here before with me. We've talked about exegesis, so you're no stranger here to Urban Logia. But for those who don't know you, if you just take a couple of seconds just to let everybody know who you are and what it is that you do.
Yes, sir. Man, first of all, man, appreciate you letting me come back on. And I said to myself, I said, man, you know what? When you made it, when Damon Richardson invited you on, the first one was a mercy invite, and now if you come back a second time, you done made it. So So, man,
Oh,
appreciate you. Listen,
yes, sir.
and I want to say this in regards to just new developments. I do pastor on the south side of Chicago, in the West Pullman neighborhood of Chicago. I've been a pastor of the Christian Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church for 11 years. Recently, there's a new development. My time in Chicago, and this is the first time I'm making it public on social media platform, but my time in Chicago has come to an end. I have just recently accepted a New Testament professor job in Three Hills, Alberta, Canada. So, and at Prairie College, and so we'll be moving that way in July. And
Oh,
it's
wow.
that's they
Congratulations.
heard it here first on your show.
You
So
heard it here first. Wow.
yeah, yeah.
Congratulations are in order, sir. I'm excited for you, man. That is
Thank you,
incredible.
man. Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Wow. Listen, so I'm like, I'm blown away, man. Now I'm
Yeah,
like
yeah.
fighting.
Yeah, it was a bummer. I didn't prepare you for that. Yeah, man, that was. But they heard it here first. They heard it here first,
Yeah,
man. They heard
that
it
is
here.
awesome. That's awesome, man. Well, um, you have definitely earned that role, and that seminary is going to be bringing on they're going to be getting an incredible professor in you, somebody that I know is more than capable, able to teach, to exegete, and to develop a new crop of biblical thinkers and
Thank you, man.
training theologians and Bible teachers and all of that, man. That is a blessing for them and for you and your family. And man, you will most certainly be in our prayers. And
Thank you, man.
man, I'm gonna have to try and hang out with you in Chicago at least one more time before you head
Yes,
up
sir.
to it's Alberta,
And Alberta,
Canada.
Alberta, Canada. Yep,
Okay.
yep, yep.
Good stuff, man. I wish that I had this video. I wanted to let me see. Hang on just a second though. Um, I want to see if I can find this video. Just a second. Because this would I think this would help the conversation get started. Hold on. I do not see it. Let me look at my recent. Hang tight.
All right.
Let me see what I can find here. I should have had that queued up. Nonetheless, let's see here. Let's see if I can find it. I'll tell you what it is. I have the transcript for it, and so even if I can't bring it up, we'll talk about that still as a segue into our topic tonight. Yeah, it doesn't look like yeah, this is not good. That's okay. So nevertheless, let me just put it like this. And I thought for sure that I had the video. Let me lead off by saying this. So about 2 weeks ago, because it's really interesting that you posted what you did a couple of days ago, because about 2 or 3 weeks ago, somebody sent me a video where if you've ever heard of the guy George Bloomer, you know what? I might be able to hold on. Aha, it's on my phone.
Okay.
So I can airdrop it and I might be able to go ahead and play it. So George Bloomer preaching at somebody's church made some statements about David. And before we get into the main part that we're going to discuss, I wanted to throw this out into the mix because this is So it's interesting that what I wanted to do anyway was, okay, hold on. That's not, let me, okay. I sent it to the wrong MacBook Pro. Here we go. Now I'm getting it. Just a second. Y'all hang in there with me. I've taken a break so long that I'm forgetting where things are. Okay, so I've got it in downloads. Let me rename it so I can find it real quick. Okay, now there we go. So, all right, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play this video. We'll talk about this for a couple of minutes and then segue into the issue of whether David raped Bathsheba. So the interesting thing is that when somebody sent this to me, my initial thought was to do a pre-recorded 10-15 minute, essentially breaking it down point for point as a refutation and then explaining the proper way to see this. And never got around to it because I had 2 or 3 other video topics that I was working on and still hadn't even dropped those. So when I saw your post, I had already started making the notes addressing that. And then the second part was addressing the rape piece. So I seen yours and then I got real excited. I was like, okay, you know what? It's time to go ahead and do this video. But instead of doing it as a pre-recorded video and upload, I'll go ahead and do it live. So let me go ahead and play this video. Give me just a second. We'll find it. Okay. And y'all let me know.
Definition. David is standing before God, and this is what he says: against thee and only thee have I sinned and done this evil in thy sight. Now, we do know that the sin of adultery is the sin against the person whoever you slept with. This is not something that's being judged by God. This is something that happened. You have gone against that husband or that wife. David is standing here before God saying, why did you bring me to this place to have this discussion? Because you know, God, and I know that at the time I slept with Bathsheba, she was not married to Uriah. There was no marriage between them. If you look in 1st and 2nd Samuel's, when David walks out on the porch and he sees the young lady bathing and he requires to who she is, they say, is that not Eliam's daughter, the wife of Uriah? They do not say, isn't that Uriah? Isn't that Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah, the daughter of Elam? It says she's the daughter of Elam because she's back at her dad's house. Why is she back at her dad's house? She's back at her dad's house because her husband had gone to war. And when the generals went to war in the Bible days, they gave their wives bills of divorcement. It's called a get. The bill of divorcement was very, very important because in combat, if you fell on my sword, whatever was yours was now mine. So in order to protect the structure of the entire house, the generals gave bills of divorcement into the hands of their wives. The bills of divorcement was held by the generals. And so when David is calling him to come back from war, he sleeps at the doorstep because he does not want to go in because the get is still imposed. In verse number 5, David is fussing at God. Verse number 4, he says, against thee and only thee have I sinned and done this evil in thy sight, that you might be clear when you judge, justified when you judge, and clear when you speak. He doubles down. He says, behold, I was shaped in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Now, when we hear this scripture quoted by people all the time, people have the tendency of saying that I do what I do because I was born this way. That's not what the text is saying. What the text is referring to is what transpires in 1st and 2nd Samuel's as God is laying out that Jesse had 8 sons and David was the 7th. He's referring to that possibly David could have been the son of a concubine or born out of wedlock. It is David who brings it up at the time that he is supposed to be repenting. In verse number 6, he said, you desire truth in the inward parts. In other words, God, you want to talk about it. Let's talk about it. You now have me here dealing with me about something that you know I was born out of.
Woo! So let's unpack that for a few minutes here before we get into the other piece. Because and the reason I want to do that is, first, I had intended to do it already.
Sure.
Two, there are numerous views surrounding Bathsheba and David and this whole narrative that I find problematic, especially views that essentially charge Bathsheba with impropriety. Here in this particular video, George Bloomer makes several very fallacious claims. One, he claims that David is not guilty of adultery at all, that David could not have committed adultery because Uriah would have given his wife a get, which is the Hebrew for the bill of divorcement, and which essentially would have made them divorced, right? Which would have made Bathsheba essentially, free game. So this is what he is essentially asserting, and which is puzzling, because then he goes into Psalm 51 and he reconstructs, essentially revisions this whole prayer and makes it seem like David is arguing with God from some perch of piety, and like, God, why did you even bring me here? As though David is arrogant, and even said, that I'm not wrong in anything that I've done, which is absurd to the context. He's clearly penitent. And then we've got Nathan's parable and all of that other stuff. But then he throws out another very absurd theory, and that is that David is essentially, his sin is really having a child out of wedlock, in the way that he was born out of wedlock. And so he interprets when David makes the statement that I was born in sin did my mother conceive me, he makes that his mother's sin, right? That he was conceived as a result of his mother's sin, and that was the result of being born out of wedlock. And even claims that when he says, God, against you and you only have I sinned, proves somehow that David really didn't sin against Bathsheba, because he claims that he only sinned against God, which nobody that I know in their right mind would interpret that as an absolute only against God. Obviously, any sin any person commits, the greatest sin or the would be against God himself, since all sin is a violation of God's commandments. But that doesn't mean, the very fact that murder occurred and adultery occurred, all of that would suggest that others were wronged in that. So that's just all crazy. But for the sake of time, rather than dealing with all of the other nonsense that he brought up, I think it would be good if we zero in on the notion of the Hebrew get, because that idea is problematic. What he is saying, out of all the nonsense that he said, this one to me is the weightier, and that is that Bathsheba was essentially divorced from Uriah. Therefore, David could not have committed adultery, because Uriah had given her a get, which in his thinking means that they were they were divorced. So I want to deal with that for a few minutes before we get into
Sure.
the other piece, because that's really worth um, refuting and explaining away, and really helping people to understand what that looked like in the context of not only the ancient Near East, the tribal and monarchical period of Israel, but what does that mean in light of this context? And
Sure.
I'll let you go ahead and take off, the first stab at that.
No, I ain't gonna. No, go ahead and whatever. It's foolishness. Go ahead. You can go ahead and do it, man. I mean, I got some ideas, but one of my problems with it is a more of kind of on a conceptual level. So yeah, you go ahead and I mean, it's a lot that you said that was terrible, but yeah, go ahead. Yeah, you go ahead
Yeah,
and deal with
yeah.
it. You know.
Okay, yeah, and then share whatever thoughts you have
Okay.
surrounding any of the other pieces as well. So let me just say this. So regarding the get, there are several things. So it's a bill of divorcement, and so in um, in Mosaic history, the get was given uh, in order to provide the wife an opportunity to marry again. So that was the purpose of it. Previous to that, men could divorce and essentially leave a woman in a state of not being, you know, uh, married again, right? She wouldn't be able to be married, and so that meant that she was essentially what would be called a guna. That meant she was chained, even if she was no longer married to this guy, and this guy could get married by sundown, and this woman is stuck, which meant economically there were a number of things she would not be able to do. Uh, Aside from depending upon the son, in many cases, a woman would have to then turn to either selling herself into slavery for economic reprieve, or even turning to things like prostitution. So, the get, or the bill of divorcement, was a mercy, so that the woman was not unlawfully or lawfully, legally chained to something that didn't give her an opportunity to remarry, as the man already had the right to do, right? And so men previous to Moses giving this legislation, this piece of legislation, would utilize this as essentially leverage. If they wanted to be malicious, they could leverage that and really destroy the woman's life, right? This is obviously what Jesus even refers to as the hardness of your heart. Long story short, there were rules around this get, right? So it is a fact that later, when men went to war, that they would give their wives a get, but it was what you would call a conditional get, or a temporary get. It did not go into effect. So this is where Bloomer is wrong. The temporary get is given, and it is conditional pending his return from war. And a certain amount of time and circumstances had to elapse. And she would have to go before the court, or the Beit Din, in order to determine her marriageability, right? In order for the get to be enforced. So this was not something that was already in play. This was like, here, hold this, and if you've got to use it, right? Otherwise, the implications to this whole notion of every soldier gave his wife a get would be the suggestion that every soldier got divorced upon going to war. And that's just not realistic.
Right.
In fact, every
Right.
single time we're reading about David and others going to war, they're returning back to their wives. So what wife, if they all gave them gets, which meant that they would be divorced? So that would be
Right.
ridiculous, right? So
Right.
it was what you would call a conditional get, pending their return. And if he didn't return in a certain amount of time, he would have to go before the court, and they would make the determination, not her. Let me just mention this, just to just to explain a little further about this whole notion of the conditional get. Now, um, Bloomer obviously gets this. So I have a background in Second Temple period Judaism, and so right away when I heard this, I started thinking, where did I hear that before? Where did I hear that before? So the theory behind this insane claim that Bloomer makes is actually Jewish. It's from the Talmud, and started looking at some of my sources. It's in Shabbat 56a, and it's where Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, that is Judah the prince, who actually descended from the house of David. He was, and the text actually explains this. It says, seeking to teach the verse in favor of David. So he says he's a descendant of David, and his motivation is, I don't want my ancestor looking bad. So seeking to teach the verse in favor of David, Prince Judah the prince, or Yehuda Hanasi, was eager to exonerate his ancestor, even in defiance of scripture, so that he stated several things. One, he stated that Uriah was justly killed by David for committing treason against him by calling Joab Lord in the presence of the king in 2 Samuel 11 and 11. Further, it was the prince who suggested that that he had given that Uriah had given his wife the get to exonerate him from adultery, right? So that is actually explained in the Talmud, that Yehuda uses this argument. Rabbi Yehuda uses this argument with the motivation of trying to explain the whole notion that David committed any kind of sin. And so this whole notion of this get, or the conditional get, was actually used by Prince Yehuda, or Judah the prince, right? So so that's really interesting that and, and again, he even tries to get him off of the hook for murder as well by saying, oh, it was an act of treason that Uriah had committed, so David was justified in being able to in actually killing Uriah. So so those things are false according to scripture. David did in fact commit adultery. He violated both the seventh command in the of the Lord, not committing adultery, which was defined by taking another man's wife, which was also a violation of the 10th commandment, which was you shall not covet what belongs to your neighbor, right? So Bathsheba was, or belonged to, his neighbor, that is someone other than David, belonged to Uriah. David coveted her. He lusted after her. He desired her for himself, and then took her, right? And so in that it was a violation of both the 7th and the 10th. But I wanted to get into that first because I wanted to address this whole notion of he didn't really commit adultery because they were divorced. They were not. And the scripture says very, very clearly, God, when he rebukes David, says that you took another man's wife and made her yours. So
Yeah.
God, Yahweh, literally says to David, this woman belonged to another man, right? So at the end of the day, God bangs the gavel and the case is over. God said that she was somebody else's wife, right? So just wanted to throw that out there. But Dr. Laws, what are some of your thoughts on some of the other things that he mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, and thank you for your assessment. I mean, I think the thing that sticks out to me perhaps the most is this proclivity to, as you say, try to exonerate David. And I think it was important to ask is like, why is this such a default gut reaction that we feel like we need to save David? We have to we got to save him, you know. And I interestingly, I think it's that I think you have ranges of that. I think, and interestingly, I think not all commentators, or not, I mean, people who have these assessments or whatever, but I think interestingly, my post is somewhat a response to that type of disposition.
Romanticize. Yeah.
Yeah, where we feel like we have to, yeah, kind of romanticize David. We can't, you know, I think it's easier for people to um, accept the notion that David was an adulterer without any, like, it's without any consideration of the possibility
Right.
that he also raped. And I think it's that same gut reaction. And to find it interesting also too, I was responding to um, this overcompensation, right? So you have this kind of proclivity that says, nope, David is our hero. You can't, don't you say nothing bad about my pastor, kind of thing, right? You know, that's, no, he's our kind of this biblical hero. And we have to romanticize and whitewash his history, and then the overcompensation of that is then to villainize Bathsheba,
That's true.
or to place all of the thing of culpability on her. So in this case, this guy, I didn't hear the rest of it, but if David did no wrong, according to him, like he's like, it's not even, you know, the murder wasn't even there. It was just this, he's got this kind of weird perspective about that. It wasn't really adultery. So, and then according to him, in the Psalter, then when David writes about no blot out my sin and all that kind of stuff, he's not even confessing sin. So that's an extreme version, but it's in some ways a type of disposition that that incited my post, because in my estimation, I see ranges of that. But in that, now I want to say this, I want to nuance this and say that doesn't mean, and I want to make it clear, that doesn't mean that if a person disagrees with me, or that you're on the other side of that you're making that type of argument. I'm just saying I've seen a lot of people who's making these arguments have that line of thinking. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that premise. I've seen the romanticizing, this tendency to, like you said, whitewash, and I want to clean the story up. It's kind of this editing, this redactor's hand in the text that wants to clean it up so that my hero doesn't look so bad, as we've seen with Yehuda Hanasi, Judah the Prince, and he's related. So he's like, this is my people. I got to fix the story up so that it looks more favorable. Good thing he was not one of the chroniclers, because we would never know the real story if this later rabbi, a descendant of David, had been one of the chroniclers. We may never know. We may have never known the true story, because this man clearly had no qualms about trying to explain that whole joint away. So we definitely do see that. And I think that it is egregiously heinous to turn around and make Bathsheba the victimizer. Right. She seduced him, and she used her.
What was she? It sounds much like the type of things that we even see contemporarily. Like, well, what was she doing there? Right? Right. Yeah. What was she doing? I mean, it's like, well, wait a minute. You hear these situations where a woman goes to maybe it's a basketball player, a football player, whatever, or something like that. They go to the hotel room of one of these guys, and then there's this accusation of rape, and the first thing out of people's mouths, well, what is she doing there? Well, she wasn't doing it to get raped. I guarantee that. Whatever she was doing there, I guarantee she didn't go there to get raped. So, yeah.
And that's correct. And that doesn't going there. Oh, she her old fast self. Well, whatever. But at the end of the day, people can change their mind in a moment, right? Even if they have intention on doing one thing, a person
Mhm.
can change their mind. We do it all the time.
Absolutely.
I'm going
Absolutely.
to the cookout. No, I don't really feel like going anywhere, right?
Yeah.
People can change their mind at any time. So regardless of, but you're exactly right. That's one of the, it's kind of a knee-jerk reaction, a reflex that
Exactly.
we have to
Yeah.
almost immediately question. And
Yeah.
we've seen things go wrong on both sides, false
Sure.
accusations,
Absolutely.
kinds of things.
Absolutely.
But but that's exactly why we need to um look more carefully at situations case by case, as
Sure.
opposed to making these blanketed kinds of judgments, starting with our suspicion that women are just really bad news anyway. You know, they'll get
Right.
you in trouble.
Absolutely.
I said this some years ago, Dr. Laws, when I think it was Christianity Today that did a thank you, Crimson Hulk. Thank you so much for this. We really appreciate your support. I said this uh, Christianity Today did an article, and I guess during the time, I can't remember what circumstances were precipitating. I think it was some pastor who had fallen. I'm
Okay.
almost certain it was. In fact, I think it was. What was the Hillsong pastors? What was the guy's name? Hillsong. You know who I'm talking about, right?
No, not Chandler. What's the name?
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
can't think of his name. They know who I'm talking about. He's since been removed, and I think he's over with Mike Todd now. But
Okay.
nonetheless, I think the situation was around there, and there was some inappropriate things. He had confessed to adultery and some other stuff. But nonetheless, there was an article talking about what's appropriate for ministers, and they were talking about Carl Lentz is his name exactly. There you go. Thank you. And so I think that was the situation that had precipitated the article, and they were talking about what was called the Billy Graham rule. And Billy Graham was mentioning how when
Yeah.
he's around women, he
Yeah.
has certain fail safes in place, so forth and so on,
Right.
accountability kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, all that is good. But I remember writing a think piece in response to that, and I said the big problem that I have
Yeah.
with that whole notion is that it has to follow from this assumption
Yeah.
that women are dangerous, and so you got to
Yeah.
protect yourself from them,
Yeah.
right? They're trouble, so you
Hmm.
have to protect yourself from them, right?
Right.
And listen, me and the woman in the room, the biggest person I don't trust is me, not the woman,
Right.
right?
Right.
I'm the
Right.
biggest dude. I don't that I don't trust. If somebody's not to be trusted here, it's not. We can't treat women like black cats
Right.
crossing the road
Right.
at night, right? And
Right.
so
Right.
no, I definitely get that, and um those have been some of the more extreme reactions. And in between that, there's a lot of nuancing of thought that both you and I have landed on.
Right.
That and I think that there is. I'm going to say this before you get into some of your thinking behind it. I actually have considered your argument and your thinking, and I think that there are some very valid reasons for thinking that, right? So this
Right.
is kind of
Right.
a case where this is not an untenable view at all. It's highly plausible. I just don't think that's the case because I'm more convinced by some other reasons that I think are more valid. And so that's kind of the difference here is that we're not going to some extreme kind of views. We're not interested in the romanticizing, cleaning it up. And then we're not trying to throw Bathsheba under the bus. I have arrived at a view that this is certainly abuse of power. We might even refer to it maybe even as sexual abuse, um, but not necessarily rape. I think the rape implications are too strong here. I'll give some of my reasons why. But Dr. Laws, If you'll go ahead and just take your liberty to walk us through the reasons that you think from scripture or what have you, why you think rape is the case here.
Yeah. So I think biblically and in our contemporary culture, we have some working definitions of rape. Uh, Rape, biblically and even in our contemporary culture. So this is not even one of those things where I'm projecting a contemporary concept back on the scriptures. I think there's continuity between the scriptures and how we think even today on these issues. One of the things that constitutes rape is volition, right? Does a person willingly engage into this, right? One of the words for it today is consent, but consent may it's a little bit of ambiguous. So consent in of itself is not the end all be all reflection of the definition of rape. In ancient Near Eastern context, consent is again, it's a little bit more ambiguous. But volition, though, right? My what a person wills or wants or desires is something that we see. For example, when David's daughter, right? When David's daughter, and I'll bring up two issues here. When David's daughter is raped by her brother, right? By her half brother. Who is that?
Amnon. Yeah.
Yeah, Amnon. That's right. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And you see this there's this element where she obviously doesn't want and she begs for him not to do it, right? And so there's this matter of it's against her volition, it's against her will. And then here's another component too. Here's another component that I think and we have to be mindful and be careful about. We along with our modern concepts of consent, and I think more of volition. Like what is an expression of the will or desire, et cetera, et cetera. We sometimes also want to measure it by the level of resistance, right? Well, did she resist? Which is, I think, contemporarily and biblically, is extremely problematic. It's problematic going back to the Tamar and Amnon situation. There is such a thing as concession, right? So she even said interesting thing in that situation, and I'm just bringing in before we even get to the text. I'm bringing in the biblical concept of how is the Bible wrestling with and dealing with addressing these issues of rape. So in that situation, she even makes a concession to Amnon's advances. She says, just ask daddy, just ask dad, and let's do it right, and all that kind of stuff. That doesn't mean, and we would, well, it wouldn't be rape anymore. But no, there's a thing that's there's this element of concession, right? There's this concession type of thing. Now, maybe there could have been multiple reasons why she kind of said what she said to Amnon. It could have been as a way of just kind of buy some time, do some stuff or whatever. And there could be multiple reasons behind that. But my point is, even how we think about the lack of resistance can be problematic.
I got you.
Yeah, I think about contemporarily. I think all of us seen Baby Boy. Remember that kind of horrific scene when Snoop Dogg was trying to rape Yvette. I forgot what was
Yvette. Yeah.
What's her name? What's her real name? I forget, but y'all know what I'm talking about. I can't think of her name right now.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, but yeah, right. he was, and she says something to, right, when in that scene, she was trying to fight him, and she's like, no, get off of me and whatever, and then he said, no, I'll knock you, and then she stopped, right? And then the son comes in. If the son didn't come in, we could have seen, could have been a rape scene, right? And she, she says, you gonna rape me in front of my son, that infamous line, right? And you're gonna rape me in front of my son or whatever. But the thing is this, is that when she stopped, when she realized she could not overpower him, she was going to have to submit to it. But that didn't mean that she was willing. It was a concession. It was Taraji, thank you. Yeah, Taraji P. Henson. Yeah. That was a concession. So even even in scripture, you have these kind of concessions that complicates the idea of consent. And then also, I think, challenges this idea that if there isn't no resistance, then it's not rape. That's first thing. So one thing is volition is a part of a person's desire. I think it's an important dynamic of how we measure rape. I think there's that has a critique against our kind of resistance motif that people try to kind of project upon it. If there's no resistance, then it ain't rape, kind of thing. And you see this type of conversation comes up in Bathsheba. People will say, well, somebody posted on my thing or whatever. I mean, it's public, so it ain't. I'm not saying anything that they didn't already post. But but it's a conversation. Hey, David was this handsome dude and all that kind of stuff, and whatever, almost as if this to say, well, she would have been glad to have it, the David, it's David, kind of thing. So you got those type of dynamics. Here's another dynamic that's in scripture. There's a few words that are used to describe these acts of rape, and the words in themselves are not intrinsically rape words, but the words are often used in these contexts for rape. One of them is kazak. It is like, it means to be strong, and almost it's in the Judges 19 component. It's in there's a couple other places. So in Judges 19, the Levites concubine is used in that, and so in kazak is this kind of it communicates this power dynamic where you overpowered me, right? And so power, the power dynamic is, whether we would use that word for force or overpower, that is one of the quintessential themes of how the Bible begins to wrestle with rape elements. Another word that is used is the word anah, which again, anah just means to be afflicted. It just means to be, bothered or afflicted. It doesn't have to be sexual. When Hannah goes up to the temple and she prays, remember, and she was Elkanah had a little concubine or whatever, and Hannah couldn't conceive, and Elkanah's other wife, kind of secondary wife, was bothering her and teasing her, and the Bible says that she was anah, she was afflicted. So it doesn't necessarily have to have sexual orientation, but it is a word often that is used in the context of a rape. So and right. And so you got these elements then of power, of volition. Is it against a person's will? Is there's this kind of power dynamic or differential element? Though these are elements that scripture use, and that we also in our modern understandings of rape then okay, so so these are all again, somebody said it seems like I'm influencing the text with my view. I'm just telling y'all that these are, you can go read the text. These are in see, listen, we debate Bathsheba's, but I'm talking about context where nobody debates it, where everybody agrees these are rape. That the Bible, this is rape. These words are used in these contexts, and it is consistently used. So I'll throw it out there. There's some other stuff I'm gonna, but I'll throw those out there as a starting whatever.
Yeah, no, this is really good. I hear your thinking in the matter. One important nuance that you made that I respect is that you mentioned that um issues regarding consent. Let me just read this. As the U.S. Department of Justice defines rape as, and they actually had to update this definition because
Sure.
the previous definition didn't suggest or include the possibility of men being raped.
Yeah,
And
that's
so,
right. Yeah,
yeah, so
yeah,
they define it as the penetration, no matter how slight, or the of the vagina or anus with any body part or object, or oral penetration by a sex organ of another person without the consent of the victim. And so, in this definition, it obviously emphasizes the notion of consent as a determining factor in rape. I appreciate something that you did say, though, because you mentioned the complexity involved when sometimes the issue of resistance and consent are not necessarily there, because there is this sense of concession, this giving
yeah.
in out
Sure.
of fear
Yep.
that doesn't make resistance or consent verbal or visible. It's not
Yep.
noticeable,
Yep.
but the internal mechanisms of concession out of fear is there. And one might say, in the absence of any kind of struggle or resistance, or in the absence of the lack of verbal or the absence of the lack of consent or anything like that, then, well, no, we're not dealing with rape. But I like the fact that you nuance that to say that while those two things there are certainly determining factors, they may not be the only factor, because that's complicated by the notion of what do you do when somebody doesn't display either of those, but inwardly they, out of fear, have just essentially rolled over. It's like a person is just, I don't want to get beat up, but just
Yeah.
you know just go ahead and hit me. They don't
Yep.
really want you to
Absolutely.
hit them, but just you
Absolutely.
know so I
Because
certainly,
it's
yeah,
not easily measurable, right? Like we
right,
it's too myopic. It's too myopic of a measuring rod uh to then measure rape. In some cases, this also speaks of how biblical concepts then can also offer some critique and offer some conversation to the contemporary thing. We tend to think that the contemporary milieu has a monopoly on helping us to understand these things, but no, there's the biblical data actually shows us the complications of taking something as myopic as consent, right? Verbal consent as using as a measuring rod.
got you. Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. So um here's the approach that I take, right? So let's say that we were to try the case of Dinah and the Prince of
Mm-hmm.
Shechem
Mm-hmm.
in Genesis 34,
Genesis 34. Yep.
right? And we were to try the case of uh, Amnon and Tamar
Mm-hmm. Yep.
in Second Samuel 13. It's actually just
Mm-hmm.
two chapters away from
Mm-hmm. That's right.
this
That's
chapter
right.
discussion.
Yep.
If we were to retry those in court, here's my argument, and then I'll spiral out from there. If we were to retry those cases in court, based on the contextual evidence around the event itself, the sexual event. The contextual evidence around the event is more than enough to tell us that rape occurred,
Yeah.
right? If we were to try David and Bathsheba's case in court, the issue that I have, I think what you're saying is highly probable. The problem is that without that, because the only person who can provide us that information, that internal non-communicable notion, would be Bathsheba. Without that, we would have to eisegetically read into the text on the mere basis of probability or even plausibility that he raped her. But we'd have to be saying more than what the text actually says. I think it's plausible to think that we could be looking at that. But if we were trying it, we'd have to read into the text things that it doesn't say, argue in effect from silence to suggest that that's what we're looking at. So let me throw a couple of things out here. So I noticed that, because I've heard many other people argue this, and like I said, I think there's some credibility and validity to a number of their arguments. So here's where here's where I'm unconvinced. One, the bigger, I think the number one argument that's constantly made is the power differential. And I hear that used a lot. So she was a woman, he was a king. Absolutely no way that she could have said no. I find that argument a little wanting, though, in light of scripture. First of all, anybody can say no and still face consequences. So no is still a possibility. Consequences may come with it, but it's not to say that you can't say no. To say that a person can't say no is to say that they can't say no without consequences. But that doesn't mean that you can't say no. A lot of people say no and face consequences all the time, right? The other thing is that we actually do have a case in scripture in Esther chapter 1, where Vashti was married to King Xerxes, the Persian king, and he wants his. I don't think she was the down girl. I think she was the main wife. He had the other concubines, but he wanted her to come out and display for men that he invited to the party. You know, I mean, and literally sexualize his wife in front of guys. I guess he had gotten drunk and then, come on, shake your thing, girl. Show these guys what you're working with, kind of a deal. And she said no. She said no. And there were consequences. She didn't die, but she got put out of the family. So I think when people say that, I hear what they're trying to say, but yes, Bathsheba could have said no, and I'm not blaming her. I want anybody to think Damon Richardson is blaming Bathsheba. What I am saying is that the argument that she could not have said no is wanting on the basis of anybody can say no and face consequences. That's number one. And two, we have a woman, a wife of a king in the ancient Near East, who's actually saying no to him and facing the consequences of her no, which was she was essentially dismissed from the harem. She was no longer, and then now God sovereignly utilizes that to set Esther up in place. Regardless of how we want to see it, Vashti said no. So that's one way that I would answer the claim to the power differential. And certainly there was a power differential, right? And I would agree that any person, even today, and not to be anachronistic about it, but any person who is can leverage power or influence, whether it's a spiritual caretaker, a pastor, a counselor, a lawyer. There are ethical boundaries that are in place designed to protect persons from falling into these situations, because it is recognized that we may not be dealing with rape, but what we are dealing with here is abuse of power. The persons who are under care are more vulnerable. So I notice how in those situations, they don't define that as rape, but they would define that power differential as essentially abuse of power, i.e., even sexual abuse, in the sense that this person leveraged their position and or their influence in a power differential that benefited them, and at the expense of the other person who is obviously in a needy or a vulnerable state. But I noticed that when those situations are described, rape is not necessarily part of that conversation, because it doesn't necessarily include the idea that the person was without consent, or they possibly could not have desired it. They're still being taken advantage of, even if they desired it, right? So I think of that possibility as well. Also, let me throw this out. I know that the argument. Go ahead, jump in.
No, I'm just saying. I'm trying to. I got you. I'm trying to take mental notes. So I got about four things. I'm trying to.
I got you. Yeah, I'm gonna toss it back to you.
Okay.
In a second. I know that you had used, and I had heard this before. You had used the in your post that he took her. That particular word there, yakah, from the lemma, lakah, right. In the manuscript, it's yakah, but in the lemma itself, the lexical root would be lakah, which can be translated to take, to seize, to bring, to get. There's a semantic range there of meanings. Interestingly, though, if we were in court, it couldn't come down to just grammar alone. We would have to have context, because while the grammar may allow for this forcible seizing, if you will, I think about, for instance, Genesis 24:67, where it says Isaac took Rebekah, and then there's a million other uses of lakah or yakah, where taking just is in the general sense of taking hold of something, not necessarily forcefully. And so in that context, I'm thinking, would he send messengers, or would he send his elite guard? Right? These were messengers, the same messengers that he sent to inquire about her. The messenger came back with the report. This is Eliam's daughter and Uriah's wife. So we can see how there is deliberate what would you call premeditation on David's part, knowing exactly who they were, that I've got to have this woman, right? But I think in all that, we're still falling short of rape. That I'm not convinced that that they took her means that they physically seize her against her will. Because I mentioned this, and I'm going to pivot back to you. I mentioned the wa consecutive, and you said, which is how we got here to this conversation. Right. The wa consecutive, it doesn't convince me in and of itself. And what that essentially means is that a call verb in Hebrew when the wa, which is sometimes pronounced vav, is used, is normally a conjunction, right? Damon and Dr. Laws were discussing David and Bathsheba. In the wa consecutive, the copulative wa is used as a consecutive. That is to say, here's the logical outcome of the previous action, right? And it says, David inquired about her, and it says that he took her and she came. When I look at, for instance, in the case of the Prince of Shechem in Genesis 34, it uses some of the same language. The same word there, yakah, for taking, is actually used. But in the wa consecutive, it says he took her and raped her. In the wa consecutive here, in this context, it reads differently. He took her and she came and he slept with her, right? And so that's the logical outcome of taking her. She came, that's a response on her part, and he slept with her was the outcome. But in the Shechem case, he took her and he raped her. And all of the context around that indicates that the logical outcome of taking her was he, and everything says, and when they found out what he did to her, and when Jacob heard what he did to her, and when her brothers found out what he did to their sister. And so he raped her is something that happens to her as a result of taking her. But in this wa consecutive, it says he slept with her, which is not simply something that he's doing to her, it's something that he's doing with her, right? So the logical outcome of taking her is not the same as what we find in the same syntactical constructive used elsewhere. It doesn't suggest that this is the end result of that, as in something forcible and something happening to her that's wrong. In fact, when we find out that David does something wrong, all of the evidence is that he did something wrong to Uriah. He took her wife, his wife, and he killed Uriah. All of what he did wrong, as it is described by Nathan, as it is discussed by God, is really what he did to Uriah. By taking Bathsheba, he took Uriah's wife. It doesn't suggest that he did something evil to her, as it is with rape. And we know the Mosaic writer and none of the other Old Testament writers had a problem describing rape in other contexts. They described it with the use of all kinds of words. We just don't find that. So we've got to read that here into the text.
Ooh, that's a lot, man. I should have started writing earlier so that I could track all that you were saying, and then I could.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh boy, where do I start? Okay. So let's first say it's very easy to fall into a kind of word concept fallacy with this conversation. A word concept fallacy says, I know you know, but for your listeners,
Yeah.
if a word is not used, then the concept is not there. We make arguments like this is the problem with trying to make that the Trinity and all that kind of stuff like that, right? Mm-hmm. So let's first just acknowledge that the text doesn't use neither the word for adultery nor rape. right? So neither of those words are used. So we just kind of assume, well, you know, in other words, we can make this argument and rebutting the kind of rape type of argument where the words are not used and these different things. And but it doesn't have to. But guess what? The word for adultery is not used either, and that doesn't stop us from conceptualizing that, hey, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's a duck, and all this, right? And so let's first start there. While I'm on that concept about the use of words, there are ranges. There is a range for what rape can look like, and we see that even in Scripture. All of those, even those scenarios that you mentioned and that I also alluded to, right? There's different levels of intensity when it comes to those rape scenarios. Perhaps the most egregious one is the Judges 19 one. With the language there is so jam-packed with language of violence more than any other. You know, when the Levite is traveling and it goes to Bethlehem, and the Jebusites, the Gibeonites, they say, no, bring the man out so that we may, and it's crazy, that we may ravage him. Like, it is so, right? And so that's rape. But guess what? Just because the Dinah situation isn't as intense as that doesn't mean that it's rape. Just as because the Tamar and Amnon is not as intense as the Dinah and the Shechem thing doesn't mean that it's rape. Like all of, like there's a range of what constitutes rape. Some are violent and extremely just sickening acts, and then others, you know, you not so much. Although I'm talking about comparatively speaking, it's rape. Rape is rape. So also though, while we're on those levels, are we on that conversation of words? Here's the crazy thing: the text doesn't have to use those most egregious words to communicate rape. Watch this. Of Genesis 19, not Genesis 19, Judges 19. In Judges 19, the crazy thing is, so the Bible says, watch this. They say, bring out the man so that we may ravage him. Anah. It's that same word for afflicted that I said that's often used in rape situations. The Bible says that he threw his concubine out there. And the Bible says, and they yadad her. They knew her. That word, that Adam, that's the same word. That's the same word that Adam used of Eve. It doesn't mean that Adam raped one. No, it just means that in Adam's context, it was an intimate thing or whatever. But in Genesis 19, I keep saying Genesis. Judges 19, they use the word yada, the same word of Adam and Eve. So it doesn't have to use a negative word to communicate the concept.
Right. I agree with that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Same thing with Psalm 51. Yeah.
Here's the other thing. So then the word took, yes, absolutely. This is my whole point, is that took has a semantic range. And I haven't heard nobody even make much of that argument, but anyway, it has a semantic range. It's just not just like yada can be used positively. In the cases of Judges 19, yada is used negatively. And so we have to look at contextual markers. And the contextual markers are there. First of all, it ain't just a matter of the fact that David is premeditated. That is there. But watch this. And this goes to a point that you were saying. You mentioned that, well, if we don't have her voice, what, you know, see, here's the thing. People don't, my PhD is in but it's in narrative criticism. So I'm a narrative critical scholar. And here's the thing: the author. This is the job of the narrator. This is the job of the author. The narrator doesn't always highlight people's emotions or people's thoughts with the words in the character, right? So a character doesn't always have to voice the problem or voice the concern. We have multiple situations where characters don't even speak, right?
Mhm.
Where they're not even active agents. And the narrator's job then is to communicate in telling the story, is to speak for them on many levels. And so we how do we learn about the woman with the issue of blood, that she had an issue of blood for 12 years, not because she said it, but because the narrator tells us that. The Mark tells us, and Matthew and whoever else is in the Gospels, they tell us that and this woman had this issue for 12 years. She doesn't speak it. So part of the thing is when you have voiceless characters, and that happens a lot.
Right.
You don't just have voiceless characters, you have nameless characters. The narrator's job then is to communicate and to speak for them. And this gets into elements of point of view and characterization, et cetera, et cetera. Now, watch this. Now, here's the thing. And so there are pretty much, watch this. There is one major phrase that she actually speaks, and the narrator uses that to move the plot along when she says, "I'm pregnant." But the thing is this, is that there are David sends, 2 Samuel 11, David sends messengers. You would expect it to say, and David sent messengers and they took her. Right? That would actually be that's the thing. That's the problem with the call while consecutive component there. And I'm gonna mention it more too when you start talking about and she came to him. But the thing is this, you would, like in that line of logic, you would expect the text say in 2 Samuel 11 and 4, and David sent messengers and they took her. And took her would then mean in that context that they just got her. They just apprehended her, not necessarily in a violent way, but they are not the subject of that verb. The text says, and David sent messengers, and he, third masculine singular, and he took her. And when she came to him, he laid with her. Now watch this. Here's the thing. Now going back to something I said, the text can take neutral words or positive words to communicate negative ideas in the same way, like in Judges 19, that yada is used to communicate elements of the rape, right? So the thing is this, is that what's important though, and this is one of the arguments that I'm making, is that first of all, people don't even consider, and I haven't heard many people even actually talk about this. People don't even consider the semantic range of take. That it can even that to take can mean, we know it can mean to take something forcibly, but that to take something forcibly doesn't necessarily mean rape, right? You can take people are seizing stuff all the time. They're seizing property. They're seizing, right? But an often neglected assessment is that in Genesis 34, we actually see the word juxtaposed with words of rape. And this is how we begin to understand semantic range stuff. Sometimes we can find the nuance of a word by the word that it's coupled with. It would be like, if somebody was trying to, 2,000 years from now, doing an archaeological dig and trying to figure out what in the world is peanut butter and jelly. Like, I know I got some sense of kind of what jelly is, but peanut butter or whatever, like, what is that, right? But they see that the word oftentimes is used in juxtaposition with jelly. It says, I know what jelly is, but I don't know what peanut butter is. So by the context of them being used together, that gives them a sense that, oh, it must be some type of condiment of sort, some type of something, right? And so then this semantic range is, we find some nuances that is not just taking something forcibly, which doesn't necessarily have to mean when they, when they remove in Daniel, when they take the stuff from the temple, right? It's also it's the seas or whatever. It doesn't mean it doesn't have to be sexual, but the fact that it can be used sexually.
Something, right? Yeah,
Exactly, right. And so then we put these other dynamics in place. In fact, the word lecoq is such an important thing that this is the thing that is repeated over and over in the parable. It is in the parable. Then the parable speaks of the fact, yes, that is taking some of a wife, but it is that layer too. It is, he mentions, yeah, you took somebody's wife, but the word is repeated multiple times. That's the emphasis. He took her. You took what was not yours, and not only was not what yours. Watch this. You took. So watch this in Second Samuel 11 when it says, and David sent messengers, took her. When she came to him, she no, back up. Where is it? Where they where is it where she, because I'm in
verse 4, and she came to him. That would be 4C.
No, not 4C. Where is it where they say verse 3. Go back. Watch this. Yeah. Right. So we got to put that in context, right? So let's just read from verse 1. Then it happened in the spring, at the time when kings go out to battle, that David sent Joab and the servants with him on all Israel, and they destroyed the sons of Amnon and besieged Rabbah, but David stayed at Jerusalem. But when evening came, David arose from his bed, walked around on the roof of the king's house. So this is evening time. She on no level does she expect him to be here. Number one, he's supposed to be at war. Number two, he just takes a random stroll, right? So there's no even cognizance that he would even be there. So and then the text begins to this text begins to create this tension by introducing information about Bathsheba. Somebody had in the conversation with on Facebook, somebody was saying, well, no, David's attractive. The text doesn't mention anything about David's attractiveness, but it says that she was beautiful in appearance. It's purposely setting up this tension. So David sent and inquired about the woman. The woman said, is this not, and one said, I'm sorry, is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? And there could have been multiple people. They could have asked people in the town. They could have asked different whatever, whoever. But guess what? She doesn't speak, but the information pertinent to her is being spoken on her behalf. It's not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. And so at that point, watch this. That verse 3 is intended. Now we got to think about, like, what is the purpose of the narrator communicating this information? In verse 2, when we get this kind of information that seems circumstantial, like she was very beautiful in appearance, she's like, well, what does that matter? Because the narrator is intentionally inserting information to, in this case, to help the plot. The plot is going to be about the conflict between the problem and the resolution. So part of this is that, so he in 2 he introduces some information. We ask ourselves, what's the purpose of it? We do the same thing with verse 3. Why is it information there? Well, it is an implicit question answer nexus, right? David doesn't ask a question directly, but implicitly go inquire about her, and the answer that is given is answer that is the answer that's pertinent to her. The answer that is given is in many ways the narrator through the characters speaking for Bathsheba. Bathsheba, this is the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah. And not just that, that was intended to create a boundary by which he's going to transverse. But once he got that information, David's going to say, okay, you know what? This ain't free game. In fact, the Lord is going to bring this up later on when he says, listen, you can have any wife. In fact, I gave you a whole bunch of wives. And if you didn't think that was enough, You could have gotten more, but you took this one, right? And so that is being established as a boundary. That is the no. That is the no. And the very next thing says, what we would expect David to do is say, okay, you know what, David left or whatever. No, David sent, and he transversed that boundary anyway, and he took her. Took her by in of itself doesn't mean that it's rape. But we know that verb, and I'm just going to read that in Genesis 34. It can be used as that. Genesis 34:2. And when Shechem saw Hamor the Hivite, prince of the land, saw her, he took her. Same.
Yeah. It's the same word.
And he laid with her by force. That in many ways, those two words together is, and I've heard you mention this before, not with this specific thing, but I heard you mention this concept. It's a hendiadys. The two terms are being used together, two words for one idea, right? And the thing is this now in Samuel, it says, and he took her and he laid with her, or let me go back. What's the 2 Samuel 11? And he took her and she came. Where is it? Verse 4. Took her when she and when she came, right? So it's circumstantial information. And when she came to him, he lay with her. And again, lay with you can use neutral words and positive words to communicate a concept, like when Leviticus 19, I'm all off. When Judges 19 says, and they yadad her, they knew her. But we know from the context that this is not a mutual thing. This is not an intimate thing as in Adam and Eve. No, this is a transverse, and this is a transversing of a boundary in a sexual boundary. And I find it interesting that we're willing to say sexual abuse, but not rape. And here's a very interesting thing too. I'm gonna throw this out there. I'm gonna throw this out there. I'm going to jump in there. I'm just throwing this out here for something I think it'd be good to study and to research. We oftentimes, what the text says, I think it's interesting because all throughout this, and this ain't got nothing to do with the rape thing. It's an interesting detail. But I think it's something to be explored. And then it says, and when she had purified herself from her uncleanness. We typically, commentators speak about that as about menstruation period. I find it very interesting though, that it comes up in this, after it says, and when she took him and laid with him, then she cleaned. I think that's something to be explored. I don't have an answer for that right now. I haven't got a chance to look into it.
Well, I have looked into that. So what would have been happening?
Let me say this. I looked into it in the sense that I know what commentators say.
Yeah.
I'm not in agreement with that. I think there's something else is going on with that. But yeah.
Yeah. So taking the narrator's point of view, I think what's going on is the narrator is setting up what is a chain of events that led to what the narrator tells us occurred, right? So all of these things are significant to the timing of the war, the fact that David is not there when he should be, is pertinent to the chain of events. The positioning of his residence in proximity to where she is, and the very fact that it's in an elevated place so that he could see her. And we do know much.
Can I say this real quick? Because you said something that made me think of something I wanted to respond to real quickly, and I'll be quiet. Just real quickly, when you talking about the narration of events, and when you had mentioned about the fact was, and she came to him, and what you just said just remind me of that, because that's all it is. It was just the difference is when Shechem rapes Dinah, she doesn't have to come to him because he's already there. David has to send her, and that's why that's there, because they're in two different locations. So yeah, I just wanted to
gotcha. Yes, good observation. Yeah, I'm just going through, the sequence of events. The narrator is um, keen to point all these things out because all these things factor into why what happened, right?
Right.
David is out of place. He should be somewhere else, but he's here. His residence is here, which gives
Yeah.
him view of her. The timing of her. Now she's not on her menstruation. She is past the menstruation, which is significant to the text. And the reason for that is that we know that even at this period, uh, after the menstruation, women took what is called mikvah. That is ritual purification. Tevila is the actual ritual purification. Mikvah is what they would essentially wash in, some sort of running water. Well, women did that every 30 days after. So this is what she was doing. So this is ritual purification, but she's already past the menstrual period. She would not do it when she was still on it. She would have to do it after, which biologically the narrator is also aware that this is a time of fertility. That this is a very ripe moment here when all of these different things occur, and so what I see as a very literary motif or pattern: seeing something, desiring it, taking it, and then consequences, right? And we don't even have to go far. And in
Oh yeah,
Genesis
no,
3,
that's totally agreement in that. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, we see that kind of motif there. I think the reason, however, that translators, and I know it many times, translation is interpretation too.
Oh,
Definitely
absolutely.
not naive to that. I notice how, for instance, the CSB translators are willing to translate yakah as rape. Nothing about the word itself means that, like you so
But
adequately
it, but it,
pointed.
but it can mean that, and
It
that's
can
important. And
mean
people
right,
people need to it can mean
right.
that. So
It
no,
can,
and I just want to
yeah,
say this because when we start saying that there's nothing in the data, there's nothing like we're stacking the deck as if it's just this ain't
yeah,
even like it ain't even a text. No, this isn't a text. This is one of a legitimate interpretation of the text.
right. And that's what I'm
Right.
saying. And I'm
Yeah, yeah,
using that to point out
yeah.
that with the semantic range of all that the word can mean, why would they say that? Well, they are not just depending upon the word itself. And you even agree with that. So
Oh yeah,
the word
absolutely. Oh, absolutely.
itself can't tell us that. Well, do we say do we say sleep
Words have to
with?
be understood in context.
It's
Words have to
got
be
to
understood
be
in
in
context.
context. So the context here, we've got surrounding information here,
And,
things like
and I'm gonna
uh,
say this while you saying that, and I'm arguing that the context does are
yeah,
there are contextual matters that you can conclude that there's rape.
yeah,
But
yeah,
go
very
ahead.
strongly here,
Yeah,
very
yeah,
strongly here. So
yeah.
uh, it says that they heard about the incident, which tells you that it's not just they had sex together. This is an incident. They were deeply grieved and very angry, for Shechem had committed an outrage against Israel by Yakah, they translated as rape, Jacob's daughter, as such a thing should not be done. The indicators here that it's not just he took her virginity, it's not just he slept with her, it's rape, because the text tells us that it was an incident. They were grieved. This kind of thing should have never been done. And if we're really looking at Deuteronomy 22 through 27, that tells us that an individual who did deflower a woman that was a virgin it was supposed to marry her. Now, if she was already married, he got put to death. That's not the
And,
situation. Dina
and
is,
in that in
yeah,
the in Deuteronomy 22, it doesn't use any words for rape. All of the
it
words
doesn't use
just so that's what
that
I'm
is
saying.
also true.
Yeah, it says shakav. It's just really just lying down. There's and
Yeah,
so and I'm gonna let you finish. I'm just saying that the author doesn't have to use rape words for it to be rape.
Oh, we agree. No, we agree with
Yeah.
that. And
Yeah.
yeah, so we fully agree that it's context
Yeah.
that brings out. And I always make this argument because sometimes the oneness, they make much ado about the way that they interpret Acts 2:38 to say that baptism should be for the remission of sins, that is, in order to have sins remitted. And I've even heard I've even heard top grammarians say that the grammar itself could support that idea, the grammar itself, but the theology of baptism does not. Right? You don't even need to go any further than to chapter 3, where Peter's preaching again, and he tells them to repent and turn back to God so that their sins might be removed. And he doesn't say anything about baptism, so clearly he links. So so how we determine what 238 means is not just the grammar alone. It's from what does the rest of theology suggest, right? Because sometimes grammar could be a slippery slope by itself.
Oh, no, it's ambiguous.
We fully agree there that. So when I look at the contextual clues, you already agree. Genesis 34 is clear case. We agree with the Amnon and Tamar in Second Samuel 13. That particular words don't have to be present, right? But that's also the very reason why, for instance, you had used for instance, the word adultery is never used, and that is true. But when you look at, for instance, in Psalms 51, or even rather in not just in Psalms 51, but rather 2 Samuel 12 rather, where Nathan approaches David, the taking is of the other the lamb, right? It's this belongs,
which is
right.
Just showing you. Jump in there. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Right. Yeah. So just showing you there that taking in the way that Nathan uses it is in light of this, because that's what adultery is. Remember, the 7th commandment and the 10th commandment are two sides of the same coin. It's in fact, when Jesus says, I've argued this before, when Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, when he talks about if you look on a woman to lust after her, you have committed adultery already. In the Greek, the word is covet. So he's really talking about, in the text, a woman who belongs to. I'm not saying that men can't lust after unmarried women, but what Jesus is referring to there is adultery. Hence, he says, you've committed adultery already. And it's interesting, he says, that you have looked onto her to covet after her in your heart. That's the sin.
But covet, but just to be clear, covet is not used in
covet.
Covet,
according to Yahweh, means taking something, desiring, number one, desiring something that belongs to someone else, taking it, whether you take it or not, has no bearing on whether coveting even existed. In the very same way that Jesus is saying the man doesn't even have to even walk through physically with the act, as he is already guilty of having done it in his heart. My whole point is to say that what we find Nathan pointing out is that exact thing. The taking as let me just finish. The taking that Nathan continuously points out is that David took what did not belong to him, but what did belong to another man. His whole parable, you would think that in his parable there would be something about rape, but no. In his parable, there was a man that only had one lamb. There was another man that was wealthy. He had a whole bunch. When the wealthy man had friends over, he went and took, there's that word, what belonged to the poorer man, the only lamb he had. Now, why is that relevant? Because David had multiple wives. He's that rich dude. He took the wife of another man and made that, that is sexually copulated with her. That's adultery. That's not only coveting, that's adultery. Even when the word is not used, it is so adequately described in the parable. What's missing in Nathan's parable is, because I think you and I would both agree that in as much as adultery and even murder are heinous and egregious sins, rape would be too. And yet it's not pointed out. And that's not, we can't miss that, because that is
wait. I disagree with that. So here's the thing.
Okay,
so here's the thing.
Okay.
No, because first of all, I want to underscore that the same type of argument that you're making is the same type of argument that I'm making, in that adultery is the word. Because if we want to talk about, the word rape is not used, the word adultery is not used. The concept is there, but watch this. Let me say this. There is nothing in here that precludes rape. There's nothing in it. There is nothing in here that precludes the idea of rape. To take something that doesn't belong to you is not just limited to adultery, because it doesn't even have to. The semantic range of that phrase is not limited to adultery, right? So I can take something that doesn't belong to you. I can steal.
We don't disagree. All I'm arguing though is that you have to depend on an eisegetical reading
because that's what I'm responding to. You're saying what I'm doing is eisegesis. If we're starting with the concept of, because you're coming with certain assumptions to the text, and one of the assumptions that you're having is that to take something belong to is limited to the idea of adultery. That's I know in theory you wouldn't agree with that, but that's the argument that you're making. That it's limited to adultery, but you can take something.
Yeah, but
you could
right.
easily,
but I'm not saying I'm not saying it's limited to. I'm saying
but when you hold on.
I'm only saying that Nathan's parable has delimited it.
No, and I'm saying it's not true, because you can easily say, you can interpret that with a whole level of a range of intensity. On the very, very basic level, he took the lamb that didn't belong to him, he stole it. That's one concept belonged to it. In relation to the fact that it's also tied to that the lamb is an analog to this man's wife, because we know the story. Now adultery is tied to it. But there's also this element. There's also this element here, and I'm gonna make this argument. There's this element of, like, look at some other the details. There's elements of obviously it ain't just adultery. And I'm gonna come back to this, because watch this. If we saying it's adultery in a sense, and truthfully, I don't even know if that's a proper way to define all of this. A question we won't have to answer is, then if it's adultery, then is she because adultery adultery assumes that there's two people that's culpable then. So then is Bathsheba mutually coachable if it's adultery? Secondly, though, that's just a question. I have an answer to it, but a point I want to make is this: is that this ain't just, it's not. You can speak of stealing another man's wife. You can speak of this in the context of adultery. But listen, in the context of all the other things that we already talked about the semantic range of take, that this was against her will, that this is not something that she agreed to. This is not whatever it. All of the verbs are. David is the agent. He takes, he sees, he's whatever. It's all about what he wants, nothing about what she wants. And when a boundary is put before that, he transgresses that. And watch this. There's something to be said about the symmetry of what happens here, what Nathan says is going to be via God, is going to be the consequences. And so there is this sedition issue where he rises up as against God, and all that kind of stuff. He revolts against divine kingship. But then there's consequences. The consequences that he says is that there's going to be what verse is that? The sword shall never depart from your house because you despise me. So, so it ain't just about Uriah. We make that argument. Well, the main thing, the only thing is that God says about the consequences is that he murdered. No, therefore the sword shall never depart from your house. Go back. I gave verse 8. I also gave you your master's house, your master's wives into your care. I gave you the house of Israel and Judah. If it had been too little, I would have added to you many more things like this. And so this is, watch this. This is about greed. Why have you despised the word of the Lord by doing evil in his sight? You have struck down Uriah. That's the first thing. And you've taken his wife to be your wife, and have killed him with the sword of the sons of Ammon. Now, therefore, the sword shall never depart from your house, because you have despised me. The sword is not just about killing, because there's not a lot of killing that happens in David's household. But there is sedition. There's an uprising. There's a division that happens with his son Adonijah and others, right? And he says, because you have despised me and have taken, there's that word again, taken the wife of Uriah and to be your wife. We've already, based off of 2 Samuel 11, this is jam-packed. And here's the thing. And so then watch this. That then creates a series of events, which then by the next chapter is starting to unfold from 13 through the end of the book. And I don't think there's a symmetry. There's a certain symmetry between what David does and what happens in his household. And watch this. It's not by chance that after God says that there's a judgment being made and that there's going to be some stuff that's happening in the household, what happens? His daughter is raped. And there's sedition. And there's like all of this stuff that he says, right? So there's a symmetry. There's a symmetry.
Let me jump in real quick, Dr. Ross.
This last little point. So there's a symmetry then that says, when we have to read 2 Samuel 11, not just in the context of that chapter, but in the literary context of the progression of the book. Right. And when we look at 11, 12, 13, and really what comes after that, there is evidence to say that there is a comparison between what David did and what God said is going to do, a symmetry rather of what David did and what God said it did. And I think that symmetry is another argument, not the only argument, another argument that we probably should look at this more than just an adultery.
Yeah, no. And what I was going to say is that I actually think that, and I've heard that before, I actually think that the strongest argument, although I disagree with it, that the strongest argument here with regard to the notion of rape would be the statement of Nathan per Yahweh, when he says, this is what the Lord says, I am going to bring disaster on you from your own family. And he says, I will take. And there's that word. He keeps
repeating that word. Yeah.
I will take your wives and give them to another. And we do know that in the incident of sedition with Absalom, takes David's wives, and they're up on the roof, and it says that he has sex with them out in the open. And I think the reason why I think that would be the strongest argument is I doubt they would have been consenting. I doubt they would have been enjoying it. I doubt that that would have been something that they would have agreed to. But he does take them. It's the same word.
Same word. And it's very jam-packed.
And has sex with them. Nothing says he took them and raped them. It says he took them and he slept with them. And
now we're back to that argument again about what it is explicit. But I want to say this, D.
Right. No. Yeah. So I was just before you say that, I just wanted to say I actually agree that I think that would be a strong argument. I don't necessarily think that what Yahweh is saying, here's what's going to happen as a consequence for what you did, is necessarily a one-to-one correlation with what David did. That would be the argument.
It's well,
Yeah.
well, I'll say this. First of all, it's an overarching umbrella, because there's a lot of things that happens from 12. We're not given details as much, with the exception of the lie with your wives, but there's the whole the sword, the kind of the sedition and division and whatever, all that stuff, contention that rises from your house is vague, that encompasses a lot of things. I'm gonna close out with this, because I gotta get ready for I gotta get ready to preach tomorrow. But I want to say this in closing, and then you can have your whatever. Listen, I think and this is that question that I raised. If this is adultery, then we are also saying that Bathsheba is mutually culpable, and if she's mutually culpable, we've turned her in from a victim to a villain. We turned her into a victim into a villain, because there's nothing in the text that what in 11 and in chapter 12, nothing that points that she shares even a hint of the blame. All of the consequences, all of the rebuke is towards David. So if we describe it as adultery, because adultery is a mutual. We're not talking about fornication. We're not talking about, right, by very definition, we're not talking about rape. We're talking about adultery. If this is adultery, then we're saying that she is mutually culpable, and there is nothing, absolute nothing in the text to suggest that. Probably means that we probably need to look at the data a little bit closer.
Man, listen, I know you've got to go, and I definitely want to respect your time. To that, I would say that the reason that you don't find Bathsheba being culpable in the text is because all of the emphasis is on David's sin. David had the greater responsibility. He was the Lord's anointed. So
Bathsheba got a pass?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the very fact that there is no mention of rebuke for Bathsheba doesn't mean that suggests that she had no culpability at all. The emphasis is
I'm making see, that's an argument from silence. I'm making it different. I'm making an argument that what the text says, I'm not making, so you that was very sophisticated of you.
I think we're saying the same thing. I'm just saying that the fact that God does not rebuke Bathsheba, but only rebukes David, doesn't, by mere fact of the rebuke being on David, mean that David is the only one wrong. The emphasis on David.
But then you have to infer that, right? Now you're doing, but now you have to
No. I'm gonna let me work it out. I'm gonna tell you exactly why.
Go ahead.
To suggest that because God rebukes David doesn't say anything to Bathsheba would suggest that she has no culpability. I'm saying that the text emphasizes David's wrong because he's the most responsible. Hear me out. He initiates it. There is the power differential. He is the Lord's anointed. This is an act of, again, premeditated, very determined murder, adultery. This is an act of corruption, all of these different things. He has the greater responsibility.
And sexual abuse, according to you.
Yeah.
And sexual abuse, according to you.
Right. But in the same way that I would say that because the text puts the emphasis on David, not on Bathsheba, that doesn't necessarily mean she doesn't have any desire in it or that she has no culpability. It's because of, in the very same way that I would say that when David says in Psalm 51, against you and against you only have I sinned, the fact that David doesn't mention, watch now, here it comes, doesn't mention Bathsheba, doesn't mention Uriah, doesn't mention anybody else, such as Eliam and Ahithophel, and all of the people who he harmed and embarrassed and shamed. He doesn't mention them. The fact that he doesn't mention them doesn't mean that he doesn't believe that he has not sinned against them. He mentions against you and you only because God is the greater one that he has sinned against. And this is exactly my argument in a symmetrical way, that the reason that the narrator puts the emphasis on David, not on Bathsheba, because he is the greater one who has actually sinned. You see my point? And so that's
let me ask you explicitly. Is she culpable? Is Bathsheba culpable in this?
She could be. I'm not saying she, and this is
okay, so that's conjecture. But guess what? But David is, and that's David is. And we then build so that's conjecture. That's conjecture, and then we build a whole theology on the fact that it's adultery, which makes her culpable, but that's conjecture. But David is. That's that. So then our response.
But again, I disagree, and I need you to hear me out. When a person, remember we talked about, we already agreed on the power differential. When a person,
with the exception that you limited to sexual abuse, and I'm not, and
no, scratch sexual abuse. I'm saying abuse of power. That's my argument. I said others may.
There's no sexual abuse there. There's no sexual abuse.
No. I think there's abuse of power, not sexual abuse. No.
Oh, okay. That ain't what you said earlier, but okay.
No. I did say sexual abuse, but I was saying that some may see it as that. I said that I see it as abuse of power, but I did throw that out there as a possibility of what this incident could include. Not saying that I agree with those things. Like I said, it could include
that's fine.
Possibility of rape. But hear me out.
But to say this though, if it's adultery, you have to make an argument that she's mutually culpable, and there's you have to use conjecture.
But no, I don't. And here's why. Hear me out, Doc.
Come on, go ahead. I gotta go. Go ahead.
I know the reason that I would say, we already know. First of all, we already know it's adultery. I don't think you would even disagree with that anyway. So that's not the thing. But
I mean, it's no. First of all, no. The question is, what is the text trying to emphasize? Adultery is a very and the thing is, I mean, on a very technical term, but I don't know. I don't know if the text. I don't even know if the text is trying to emphasize that.
I don't. At the very basis, I don't know anybody who would not describe this as an act of adultery on David's part. But hear me out when I say that that doesn't necessarily make Bathsheba culpable. And the reason for that, again, let's just take, not to be anachronistic, but let's just take a pastor, right? Let's just take a pastor, and let's just say that a pastor sees a woman in his congregation that is married, and she looks beautiful to the pastor. And by happenstance, the woman comes to the pastor for some counseling. She has some needs for in the marriage, and she is very vulnerable. She's discussing this, and there is a clear power differential. And the pastor takes advantage of her vulnerability. Now, they have sex. Now, for the very same reason that I would say the pastor commits adultery,
did the woman commit adultery too?
Hear me out. The pastor commits adultery. I'm not saying that necessarily the woman is culpable, but that doesn't necessarily mean that. Okay, hear my point. The fact is that even if she desired it, the fact that she is vulnerable in that moment, even if it's something that she is desiring, her desire is being exploited in that moment. So nobody would say, even if she desires it, that she's wrong. The pastor exploited the vulnerability of the power differential. Nobody would blame her, even
Why not?
if she
Why not?
wanted the
The wife,
pastor.
look, guess what? No, why not? That's a straw. That's not even true. Like, why not? If I guarantee his wife, the pastor's wife, would also blame her. Like that's not. No, that's not. Like, okay, here's the thing. Part of the argument that I think you're making, and I agree with, is this: is that abuse of power in of itself doesn't mean rape, and I would agree with that.
Yeah,
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. I'm saying that the text is not emphasizing, and again, she could be vulnerable, whatever. That may help us to have, that may cause us to have compassion on her, maybe. But guess what? If I cheated on my wife, I've never done, don't plan on doing it. But if I cheated on one of my wife with one of my members who were vulnerable, I guarantee my wife would hold her and me culpable. But it's not, it's, and yeah, that's just not a, it's not a, yeah, that's, she married, I'm married, whatever. That's, yeah. So I'm just saying, but here's the thing. We gonna go in circles with that. I'm gonna leave with this. We go in circles with that. I'm gonna leave with this. Here's an important dynamic though. I think we need to, it's interesting to me because there's a lot of data, and I would even argue more data to suggest than the emphasis is on rape than adultery. But what I want to leave your listeners with is, we don't even, not everybody, I'm saying a lot of people don't even consider the possibility that this is rape. It's just not even a possibility. And I've given exegetical, it ain't eisegesis. I gave exegetical arguments for this. I want to say this. I often do this when I'm doing exegesis. Sometimes even with people, when I'm disagreeing with a position, I'll say, well, what if they're right? What if they're right? We ain't talking about people who don't believe in the Bible. You and I are both pastors. We both take the word serious. We do our homework. What if the other, and I would just want people who don't even consider the possibility that it's rape. What if it's right? What should we learn from that then? Because and I think there's a couple things. I think number one, we see how David was repentant. David was whatever. He was penitent of all that. Not just of if it was not just adultery, but just of a rape kind of thing. And we see him fall. And it shows that, guess what? We simultaneously have the worst and the best of traits. The same man who I'm arguing, and I think is exegetical reason, who committed a rape, is also the same man that can be redeemed, the man after God's own heart. We simultaneously have the best of traits and the worst of traits. And sometimes our ideas and our assumptions of what a person is capable of may, or whatever, I think can get in the way of sometimes of how we interpret things. If nothing else, though, I think that I think the arguments that just kind of just totally dismiss, I think it's not exegetically honest. They just totally dismiss that this is just not a very real possibility. I'm do my best to really be quiet. I want you to get the last words, man. I got to go so that I can get on tomorrow. But I want to say publicly, man, I thank you for letting me be on.
Man, listen,
and appreciate it, man.
I thoroughly enjoyed this back and forth, and I will be preaching tomorrow as well. And but man, I appreciate your graciousness, and I as always, I admire your astute approach to exegesis, and the way that you there are a number of things that conclusions that you would come to that I agree with, even though I disagree rather
Sure.
with your premise. I have great appreciation for the way that you are thinking about it and nuancing. Man, thank you for your time. First of all, for even being willing to have a public conversation. Man, we just need more of this kind of stuff, right?
Sure,
And
sure.
the debate is one thing. I think any kind of public discourse where there are numerous perspectives is debate by default, but
Sure,
not
sure.
necessarily in a an academic sense where there's certain structure to it or whatever. So I think it's good for people to hear theological conversation like this, where there is a mutual respect and where there is both mutual love for the Word of God, uh,
Absolutely.
a high view of Scripture, and all of that.
Absolutely.
Even if and even an understanding that what we're dealing with is probably at best a tertiary issue, right?
Sure.
This is not
Absolutely. Absolutely.
it's not going
Absolutely.
to decide. It's not salvific or anything like that. It's not an essential matter of the faith, but it is truth, veritas, aletheia is always important one way or the other, and how we respect truth or how we arrive at concluding something is true is always at least worth the conversation. So I'm not even going to have the last word in terms of this topic, but just to thank you for coming on and discoursing with me, your brother. And man, we've got to do this again without a doubt,
Let's
on
do it,
another
man.
issue, another time. I'm sure you're going to need some time for adjustment into your tenure,
Yeah.
your new assignment, and everything, and your family getting adjusted into the area. And man, if there's anything I can do to make that to help you along in that area, let me know, man. I'll fly up there on my own dime and help out, man. So I just
Appreciate you, man.
appreciate you, bro, and that's real. Thank you for coming on tonight, and thanks for all of the moderators, Shawnee, Michelle, and all of the people who have joined in. There was a great conversation going on in the chat. Like this was like, man, this was really good. We got people talking, we got people discussing it. Like I said, I've heard really good arguments on all sides of it, right? And perhaps this is one of those situations where Paul says, let every man be persuaded in his own mind based on what we think is the strongest of evidence. But this conversation was definitely worth having. Couldn't think of anybody better than to have it with you. I like to have another word salad, brother, on there, so I'm not alone. People are like, come on, Richardson, man, break that word down instead of the other. Gotta have another word salad, brother, in here, and take some of those darts. Man, thank you again. I know that the listening audience is greatly appreciating this conversation as well. And man, let me let you get on out of here, brother. Thanks so much for stopping by and blessing us with your insights.
Bless you, man. Appreciate you, man.
Yes, indeed. Wonderful, wonderful. Thanks again, my brother. So, man, listen, we thank you all for stopping by tonight, and we're going to be doing more of this in the near future. Thank you. Yeah. So, next stop for me would be, and I'm hoping that one of the next times we're talking that I'll be crossing the burning sand, running through the finish line, hitting the tape, and finishing up this PhD journey that I'm on as well. Thanks for all your time, your patience, and your prayers, your support of this ministry. Keep on supporting. I really appreciate you all. This week, my itinerary. So I'll be preaching tomorrow, Tuesday, again teaching, taking a Wednesday. I'll be heading over to Jamaica, where I will be teaching Thursday night, Friday night, 2 sessions on Saturday, and then preaching Sunday morning. So you all keep that in prayer. That summit is on getting the gospel right. It's a gospel summit, and so real very important summit on the gospel. And keep your prayers up for me and as I travel. And again, as always, thank God for all of you Love you all, and you guys are greatly appreciated. You're in my prayer, and